So folks, we're back for another Titans mini set review, and we've got YOGG Saron Unleashed, the new YOGG Titan. He is a 15 mana 7/5. He costs one less for each spell you've cast this game, so we're gonna have some 0 mana YOGGs in our life sometime soon. And he's got 3 abilities, of course, as Titans do. Induce Insanity, force each minion to attack a random enemy minion. Reign of Chaos, here, take control of an enemy minion. And Tentacle Swarm, fill your hand with 1/1 Chaotic Tendrils. So we're finally seeing some Chaotic Tendril payoff of sorts, although we'll talk about it. So this is awesome. YOGG, number one, excited to see YOGG. Obviously, love YOGG, and YOGG is going to be playable, I think, fairly soon in a lot of decks. Not every deck, frankly, will be able to play YOGG because they don't have enough spells, but so many will burn through 5, 6, 7 spells so quickly that I would expect YOGG Saron to start coming down in the mid game fairly often. Turn 6, 7, 8 YOGGs don't seem totally insane to me. Some decks can maybe even push YOGG out a little sooner. Might sometimes, he'll be a turn 8, turn 9, turn 10 play just because maybe things didn't line up or you had to play full cost spells throughout the game. But nonetheless, I think somewhat of an option to come down early enough that he's meta relevant, right? Like, this is a card much like other Titans that could make a big impact in those kind of mid to late game turns there, around that 6 to 8 range. I could see YOGG being really good. And some of these abilities are great, like take control of an enemy minion. That is an awesome mind control effect that could be a really big swing on board. We've seen just sometimes a Titan removing a single minion feels good. Induce Insanity is a little bit more of a board clear, kind of a risky one. It's not always going to clean up everything, but still gives that option if your opponent has a wide board, might feel good. And then Tentacle Swarm, if you're like ahead and looking for a proactive kind of play, the Tentacle Swarm is just going to give you a bunch of value. So that said, let's talk about the Chaotic Tendrils, because I am still not convinced that a lot of Chaotic Tendrils makes them good. The fact that Chaotic Tendrils only cast a singular spell it means it's just hard to get the directionality right on the Chaotic Tendrils. Like, each one you play doesn't necessarily have a very high likelihood to do what you want. If I'm desperate for a board clear, how many Chaotic Tendrils do I have to play before I get a board clear? And in fact, does playing more of them sometimes hurt me because I get increased costs too much? And it's like, eventually I'm up to a 10 mana spell every time, and it's like, well, shoot, maybe there aren't any board clears left. It depends, of course, on the pool of cards you're talking about and what's in rotation at any given time. But there may be instances where some tentacles feel like they have no chance to hit anything good for you, and ultimately there's just so many cards in the pool that the consistency still feels like it's going to be really low. Now, I think it does help where you can play multiple Chaotic Tendrils in a given turn, because you're basically giving yourself extra rolls. Prison of YOGG Saron is 4 random spells. 4 Tentacle Swarms is 4 random spells, and it's a little bit cheaper than something like Prison of YOGG Saron. But there is still, a limitation. There's number one, board space limitations. If they don't clear themselves out, if you had 10 in hand, you can't necessarily play 10 in hand. I just think the consistency is not there for this to be a good competitive kind of play, because it just requires so many additional cards, so much additional follow-up. You need a lot of hand space, frankly, and if this is being played in later game decks, you don't have a lot of hand space to get as many tentacles as you might need in order to play enough to make them more consistent. So a lot of big questions still on the Tentacle Swarm side of things. Now, that said, I think the mind control is really good. I think Induce Insanity is pretty solid. You get a body with YOGG. He can be 0 mana over the course of a game. There's a lot of upsides to this card that I do like. I do think this will get played. I just don't think this was the payoff we needed for the Tentacle Swarms to feel really good, personally. So super excited to play this card. I will play Tentacle Swarms all day. They look really fun. They look crazy and chaotic, which is great as a YouTuber. I'm just not so sure that's going to be great for making YOGG feel as competitive as possible. And I do not think this saves the other Tentacle Swarm cards either. Like, are you willing to make a bunch of bad plays so that your YOGG Tentacle Swarms are slightly better? I don't see that happening. I don't think so. So this did not save the other Tentacle Swarm cards as we hoped, but I do think YOGG still looks pretty cool. All right, so next up here we have the Eye of Chaos. Yet another chaotic tendril card, and this one's a 5-mana 5/4 battle cry. Get 2/1/1 chaotic tendrils. And listen, I hate to harp on this, I just don't see it for this one either. You know, it's really expensive up front, not only to get this 5-mana 5/4, which feels really bad, but it's just the first, I would say the first like 3 or 4 chaotic tendrils are just almost always gonna feel really bad. That's a lot of mana just to get all of this moving, and even then after that, I don't even think they're that good either. So you're doing all this setup for a payoff that just seems average at best because of the inconsistency. It's like I compare this in my brain to like School Teacher. You know, School Teacher is a 4-mana 5/4. Well, used to be when it came out anyway. Now it's a 4-mana 4/4, I guess. But regardless, very similar body on the front end. You get a 1/1 where you get to discover an ability. That ability is a targeted ability and it's a class ability, so it has like incredible consistency. The first 2 School Teachers compared to the first 2 chaotic tendrils, like forget it. They're 1,000 times better than the first Eye of Chaos and couple chaotic tendrils. So can you afford to just be that slow for such an inconsistent payoff? I don't see it, man. I think this takes too long to spin up. The front half of all these cards just doesn't feel good enough. I think if you take 1 or 2 mana off a lot of these, maybe match their stats up. You know, if this was a 3 mana 3/3 that gave you 2 chaotic tendrils, okay, that's a little easier to weave into turns. But as a 5/4, man, that just feels so pricey to me. Not to mention, in your YOGG deck, you need to be playing spells. Like, these are all minions. You've got to be playing all these minions to get your YOGG juiced up for the tentacles you get off YOGG, and then you're playing all minions, so you don't have any spells to discount your YOGG because you've spent all this time. So I just this whole package, I don't see it coming together at all, which I'm sad. It looks so fun. And then finally, Prison Breaker here is a 4-mana 4/4 with Battle Cry. If you've cast 5 or more spells this game, deal 3 damage to all enemies. And yeah, the problem with this card, it's another one that is encouraging you to play spells as a minion, which some inconsistencies there again. But I feel like this 3 damage is not necessarily going to be enough at the time it takes you to get up to 5 spells. In other words, like playing this on turn 4, 3 damage is probably still acceptable, although already getting a little bit iffy. Some board states will already kind of dodge that a little bit. And can you play 5 spells by turn 4 in a deck that's running minions like this? It feels like there's some incongruence there that doesn't line up to me. And then by the time you maybe get turn 6 or 7 where those spells feel like they've been more easily achieved, then this 3 damage probably falls off and doesn't keep up enough when it comes to clearing the board. Now this can go face, it's all enemies, so like that's a little bit of a bonus. But I think most decks will just have better ways to do similar sorts of things. I'm actually brought to mind like the Mage card that came out this expansion. I forget his name. He's like the mech guy that the Inquisitive Creation, right? These cards actually have a pretty similar use case in many scenarios. Like this one obviously can't go face, but there's been so many instances where this guy had 5 or 6 damage or something, and that felt really relevant. Like he needed to be big enough to clear out some 4/4s and 5/5s and such. The Prison Breaker, in some ways easier to achieve, certainly much easier to achieve for a neutral, across a variety of classes, but also the payoff isn't there, and it doesn't matter how easy to achieve it is if the payoff isn't good enough. And I fear the payoff for this actually will not be good enough or soon enough, I guess, based on this conditionality. Like, could this have been a 4-mana 4/4 that dealt 4 after 4 spells? Like, there's something aesthetic there that would have been really pleasing and also might have actually made this card a bit more viable. But as it stands, I don't see it. So moving on here, we've got Druid cards, and a couple of these seem a little scary. Contaminated Lasher here is a 2-mana 3/2 battle cry. If you've cast 5 or more spells this game, refresh 4 mana crystals. So not a card you're looking to play early, but once you play it late, this actually seems pretty crazy. Spending 2 to refresh 4 is really like refreshing 2, but refreshing 2 is still really powerful. That's a lot of extra mana in a given turn, which can allow you even bigger pop-offs. That's always scary. Like the Druid has so many times utilized these kinds of cards to great effect. It is noteworthy that it doesn't cost 0 like the old Lightning Bloom, which is a little bit different because you can't go to 0 and then pull yourself back up. So if you're on 8 mana, for instance, and you need to play an 8 mana card, and then you want to refresh crystals, you can't use the Contaminated Lasher to do that. So that little 2 mana overhead on it is important. It might push some of those crazy swing scenarios back a little bit. Suddenly you can only play a 6 mana card and then the Contaminated Lasher to refresh too. But I think there will still be moments where that feels really good. There's still going to be instances where that just gets you a little bit of a speed bump on board, a little bit of presence and a threat developed while still advancing whatever other game plan and still utilizing your mana really successfully. So just helping you kind of keep up and cheat onto board a little bit, which can be one of Druid's weaknesses while they're setting up and developing for all those crazy late game things that they can do. If they fall too far behind on board, that's an issue. This might help them keep up a little bit. And often Druid can weave these kind of plays in because they have so much available card draw and reload that it doesn't really hurt to play a card like this. And I think that means there are going to be decks that find a home for this. There are going to be certain lines and mana curves where this just fits really well and looks really good, and that's going to be nuts. I don't know if Wild needs something like this, but Wild can always snowball even harder off this kind of stuff. So yeah, Contaminated Lasher I think looks like it's going to have some utility somewhere for sure. All right, so next up we've got Era Soilizer. This is a 3 mana 2/2 Battlecry and Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 Treant. Historically, we kind of had like 3 mana get 2 2/2s. This is 3 mana get 3 2/2s. I mean, only 2 of them are Treants, but the free bonus 2/2 on the front end, I think you're okay with. And you actually kind of like that part of this is a Death Rattle, I suspect. Just giving you a little bit of that extra stickiness so that you don't lose the board too hard might actually be pretty good. With stuff like Conservator Nymph in particular, that kind of wants a Treant to stick around into a future turn. That's the card that turns a Treant into a 5/5. Having that stickiness is nice. So this is kind of like, it's going to sound weird, kind of like Soul of the Forest. It's not, right? Soul of the Forest is for a whole board, but I like that this is similarly sticky and can preserve stuff left over for you while still actually developing itself. Soul of the Forest, of course, can be much stickier, but you have to have that board that's already there for it to work. So this is kind of a middle ground, I guess we'll say, where you get some of that preservation, but you also still get immediate development as well. And yeah, I think that's cool. This is honestly a little slow for Treant Druid, which sounds kind of insane as a 3 mana card that gets you 6/6 in total stats. But it's a little true. Often the 3 drops in Treant Druid, as we see it today, are kind of more of the follow-up cards, like we talked about Soul of the Forest, Herald of Nature. They do run Plot of Sin, which is worse than this at a base level, I would say, but much, much better once it's infused. So is it worth kind of cutting Plot of Sin for the consistency of this, or you want the upside of Plot of Sin? I think that's debatable. That said, this is not just a card for today. This is a card that can be good in the future. And I think this has the numbers to be relevant in various kind of token Druid builds over time. And particularly in Treant Druids, gets a nice little bonus here as you're getting multiple Treants. So all in all, I really do. I think this card looks good. I like this one fairly well. Moving on to the Forbidden Fruit. This is a new 0 mana spell. That fruit does not look delicious. It is literally made of rock. Don't eat that. You're going to have a wicked stomach ache. Anyway, this 0 mana spell. It's a forbidden card, which is cool, bringing that mechanic way back. It's been a long time since we've seen that. You will spend all your mana, as you do with forbidden cards, and then you will choose one, gain that much attack this turn, or twice as much armor. So this is actually a pretty spicy card, I think. 10 mana for 10 attack might not sound great these days. Like, oh man, just a Pyroblast? I want bigger, faster damage. But here's the thing, right? If you're pushing for lethal, efficiency doesn't matter. Sometimes just 10 damage is going to be what you need to kill the opponent, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't feel particularly efficient. It's just there and it's lethal. And then other times, there might be some breakpoints here and there where just an extra 2 to 4 attack is valuable and necessary, and you need it to clear a taunt or get through something or just set up, and that's cool. But then you also have this flexibility where if you need it, it's 20 armor sometimes, or take a quick 6 armor if you got 3 spare mana laying around, right? There's all these little moments where I think this is actually going to feel pretty good to play and matchup dependent. it just gives you so much flexibility. And then I think there are more direct synergies of this as well, of course, with things like Ignis. If you get a Wind Fury weapon and you have Forbidden Fruit, like, forget it. You know, that's gonna be just an insane amount of damage sometimes, because Ignis is basically multiplying this Forbidden Fruit very often with those Wind Fury sort of weapons. So having this that exists is cool. Now, that said, is this a card that is only going to be like good when discovered? Is this going to be something that makes its way into people's decks if they don't have reliable enough attack payoffs? That makes me a little bit more nervous in standard format right now. I don't know that either of the big Druid decks in standard today need this. I think in Wild, there's like Quest Line Druid and stuff probably loves this sort of thing. I don't know. It might be too expensive even in Wild. Probably even scarier in Wild. There's always ways to break things about. Guff, I guess, is like 20 attacks. So there you go. Have fun, Guff players. But in standard, you know, this is one of those cards that I think has utility. It's just gonna take a minute maybe to find a home for it, because right now I don't think the Druid decks need this one. But just something to keep in mind. I think the output here is actually so high sometimes, and fills so many gaps so well, that this card could definitely find some use case. YOGG is a 4-star card. Prison Breaker is a 2-star card. Eye of Chaos is a 2-star card. Contaminated Lasher is a 4-star card. Era Soilizer is a 4-star card. Forbidden Fruit is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Let me know what you think of YOGG. Like, can you convince me on this Chaotic Tendril package? Trust me, I want it to be good more than anybody. That's great for videos. That would be awesome highlights, but I'm not sure. It's just not in my brain. It's not working right now in my brain. So share those thoughts. Real quick, I will not be around for tomorrow's cards. I'm doing some traveling tomorrow, so I just won't have a card review tomorrow, but we'll catch up, I think, on Sunday for the final day of reviews. We'll get Saturday's cards and, of course, Sunday's cards when they're freshly revealed. So all that said, thank you much for watching. Stay tuned for that last final review. And until next time, game on.